Right, so picture this. It's late May 2025. Canada, the land of maple syrup, Mounties, and an almost pathological need to apologize, has decided to tell the United States, specifically its access to Alaska, to take a long walk off a short pier. Yes, you heard that correctly. Access to Alaska, that enormous, chilly bit of America plonked inconveniently on the other side of Canada, is suddenly a massive geopolitical football. This is Canada, specifically the province of British Columbia, leading the charge in effectively blockading American commercial traffic, heading to its 49th state. So, grab your popcorn, because this North American neighborly dispute has just gone from a polite disagreement to a full-blown drama. So how did this all kick off? Well, it seems British Columbia, under the leadership of Premier David Eby, decided it was time to respond to what it viewed as President Trump's rather unpredictable, shall we say, flair for international trade relations. Back in March 2025, Eby announced plans for legislation that would allow BC to impose tolls on those commercial trucks rumbling through its territory, from the lower 48 states up to Alaska. The stated rationale was quite direct. This was a response to President Trump's erratic Canadian tariff plans and, rather alarmingly, potential military action. Premier Eby essentially framed it as a defensive measure, a way for BC to protect its own economic interests in the face of American unpredictability. Now, a premier can't just wake up one morning and decide to stick a toll booth on a highway willy-nilly, not even in Canada. There needs to be, legislation. And so, following Premier Eby's rather startling announcement, the British Columbia government duly introduced the Economic Stabilization Tariff Response Act. This piece of legislation, introduced by Deputy Premier Nikki Sharma, was the legal toolkit designed to turn the threat of tolls into a potential reality. The act itself is quite clever, in a slightly passive-aggressive bureaucratic way. It grants the BC government the authority to levy tolls, fees, or other charges on vehicles using provincial infrastructure. That means highways and, rather pointedly, coastal ferries too. The message to Washington, and by extension to President Trump, was clear. We have this act now. We can implement these tolls. Your move. British Columbia wasn't alone in its newfound assertiveness. Oh no. It seemed Premier Eby's bold move opened the floodgates, and suddenly, other Canadian provinces decided they too had a few grievances to air, and a few economic levers to pull. The federal government, under Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, quickly announced its own set of retaliatory tariffs against the United States, signaling that this wasn't just a rogue provincial action, but part of a broader, coordinated Canadian response. Beyond federal tariffs, BC itself wasn't content with just the threat of tolls. The province also declared its intention to halt provincial government purchases of American products. Furthermore, in a move that surely caused consternation in certain American distilleries, BC announced it would stop sales of alcohol from Republican-led states, yes, including Alaska, in its provincially run liquor stores. Then, other provinces joined the fray. Ontario, Canada's most populous province and an economic powerhouse in its own right, decided to get in on the action. For Alaska, a state already grappling with unique logistical challenges due to its geographical isolation, these Canadian maneuvers landed like a punch to the gut. The vast distances and harsh weather conditions already make transportation a Herculean task. Suddenly, the last frontier found itself on the front line of a trade dispute it didn't start, but was set to suffer from significantly. The ripple effects of this conflict were felt almost immediately. Alaska's governor, Mike Dunleavy, found himself in the unenviable position of trying to sound optimistic while his state's primary supply artery was being threatened with a tourniquet. His words, though hopeful, couldn't mask the underlying anxiety. The potential impact was, and is, enormous. Empty shelves and worried faces became a common sight, painting a grim picture of what could come. Consider the basics. A huge proportion of Alaska's fresh produce, groceries, and other essential consumer goods arrive via truck, traversing those very British Columbian highways, now under threat of tolls. The lifeline of the state was at risk. Jamie Benson, the executive director of the Alaska Trucking Association, didn't mince words. He laid out the stark reality in no uncertain terms. He warned that the proposed tolls would inevitably increase transportation costs. This would, in turn, lead to higher prices for consumers. The Canadian actions, born of a dispute with Washington, threatened to plunge Alaska into a new kind of economic chill, one originating not from its famous glaciers, but from its southern border. The stakes were high, and the future uncertain. The reliance of Alaska on the trucking routes through Canada cannot be overstated. It is, quite literally, a lifeline. These routes are essential for the continuous flow of goods and services that keep the state functioning smoothly. Everything from building materials for new homes and infrastructure, to medical supplies for hospitals, to everyday items that stock the shelves of local businesses, makes that long journey north by road. Without these deliveries, many communities would face significant shortages. The efficiency and relative affordability of this land bridge have been fundamental to Alaska's development and its connection to the rest of the United States. It has allowed for a seamless integration of supply chains, ensuring that goods move swiftly and cost-effectively. To suddenly have that lifeline constricted by tolls is a terrifying prospect for many Alaskans. The introduction of tolls could significantly increase the cost of goods, making everyday items more expensive for consumers. The concern extends beyond mere cost. It touches on the very reliability of the supply chain that Alaskans have come to depend on. The imposition of tolls, or any significant alteration to the transit rules, could also lead to delays and uncertainties. These delays could disrupt the timely delivery of essential goods, causing a ripple effect throughout the economy. Trucking companies operate on tight schedules and complex logistical plans. Any disruption can have cascading effects, impacting not just the trucking industry, but also the businesses and consumers who rely on these deliveries. If new regulations or fee structures are implemented without clarity or with bureaucratic hurdles, it could lead to trucks being held up at the border, disrupting just-in-time delivery systems. This could result in significant delays and increased costs. The system is built on predictability, and that is now under serious threat. The uncertainty introduced by these potential changes could undermine the stability of the entire supply chain. Unsurprisingly, the Canadian actions, particularly BC's toll proposal, did not go unnoticed or unanswered in Washington, D.C. The American response was swift, and it carried its own set of economic threats, primarily targeting a sector dear to British Columbia's heart: the lucrative cruise ship industry. U.S. Senator Dan Sullivan from Alaska, a vocal advocate for his state's interests, immediately threatened economic action against British Columbia. His weapon of choice? A potential waiver of a rather archaic but highly significant piece of American legislation known as the Passenger Vessel Services Act, or PVSA. The PVSA, in essence, prohibits foreign-registered ships, which, by the way, includes almost all the big cruise liners that visit Alaska, from transporting passengers directly between two American ports. Senator Sullivan's threat was to seek a waiver for the PVSA. If granted, this would allow those foreign-flagged cruise ships to sail directly from, say, Seattle to Juneau, Skagway, or Ketchikan, completely bypassing British Columbia. The economic impact on BC would be devastating. This whole sorry mess with Canada potentially restricting access to Alaska isn't entirely without precedent, you know. It's a situation that has echoes of a not-so-distant past, a time that many Alaskans remember all too well. For Alaskans, and indeed for the North American cruise industry, this has a rather unpleasant ring of déjà vu, harking back to the dark days of the COVID-19 pandemic. The memories of empty ports and silent coastlines are still fresh. In February 2021, Canada made a decision that sent shockwaves through Alaska's tourism sector. It extended a ban on cruise vessels carrying more than 100 people from operating in Canadian waters. This decision was a major blow to the industry. The impact on Alaska's tourism industry back then was catastrophic. Businesses shuttered, streets emptied, and the vibrant tourist attractions turned into ghost towns. To put it in perspective, in 2019, before the pandemic hit, Alaska welcomed around 1.3 million visitors who arrived by cruise ship. These visitors were crucial to the local economy. These passengers are the lifeblood of many coastal communities in Southeast Alaska, supporting countless small businesses, tour operations, and seasonal jobs. Their absence was deeply felt. The Canadian ban in 2021 ensured another season of economic hardship for a state already reeling. The local businesses struggled to stay afloat, and many couldn't survive the prolonged downturn. So when Canada started making noises about restricting access again in 2025, you can imagine the collective groan that went up across Alaska. The fear of history repeating itself loomed large, casting a shadow over the future. As we stand here on May 31, 2025, surveying the rather messy landscape of U.S. Canada relations, it's clear that these recent actions, BC's proposed tolls, the broader Canadian retaliatory measures, and the American counter-threats, are more than just a temporary squabble. They represent a significant escalation in trade tensions, one that could leave lasting scars on the relationship between these two historically close allies. The immediate impact on Alaska is, of course, the most acute concern. The potential for increased costs, disrupted supply chains, and a general chilling effect on the state's economy is very real. But beyond the dollars and cents, there's a deeper erosion of trust. For decades, the U.S. Canada border, particularly the transit route to Alaska, was seen as a symbol of cooperation and mutual benefit. Now, it's become a bargaining chip, a point of leverage in a larger political game.